thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited for this conversation. And as I mentioned to you earlier, it's definitely a topic that is near and dear to my heart. This whole idea of how technology can be used to really make justice more effective and how you're using it for innocence, the Innocence Center. I'd love to kind of kick it off with you telling us a little bit about what the Innocence Center is and how you came to be involved with it.
Sure. The Innocent Center is a nonprofit law firm based in San Diego, California. And the mission of the Innocent Center is to free the wrongfully convicted from prison, educate the public on the causes of wrongful conviction, and assist our innocent clients as they come home so that they can reacclimate and rejoin society in a better way from how we've always done it, which it's always been a challenge as innocent people have come home from prison. They don't get the same resources that are available to those that are coming home on parole or probation. So our mission primarily, though, is free the innocent. And so I came into this work many years ago. I was sitting in my first week of law school, and I met an individual named Timothy Atkins, who had been in prison for 23 years for a murder he didn't commit. He'd been home for 4 months. I was 23 years old. And so, I realized in that moment that this individual had spent his entire life in prison for a crime he didn't commit. And Tim mentioned that there were thousands more just like him sitting in prison waiting for help. And so that was my call to this movement. And so I got involved in a law school clinical program and did that for quite a while until launching the Innocent Center in August of 2023.
It's amazing. And I guess when you first discovered you had this calling through knowing about Timothy, as you mentioned, did you ever feel conflicted? Did you feel as though, maybe a lot of your classmates were going on to work at firms and take on other roles that, I guess society would deem as, something as the traditional career path? Did you ever feel conflicted about taking on this line of work?
Sure. I went to law school to prosecute white collar crime. And so I came in with this entirely different mindset. I thought, there's a lot of insider trading going on in some of the small cap and mid cap stocks, and like that would be a great place for me to go and try to fight that kind of crime. And so I was on a totally different path. And this just kind of presented itself. And I think there were other things that you kind of bring up as well, which is, you don't really get into this line of work because you want to make a lot of money. And I think a lot of people go to law school because they think that is something that's going to happen. It does happen in, quite a bit. And it kind of just varies depending on what area of law you go into. But that's certainly not, kind of what happens when you go into innocence work. And so I've certainly had a lot of friends that have gone on to do really well in a lot of big firms. And but I still to this day wouldn't change a thing. I would go back and redo everything. And in fact, I wish I would have known more about the problems in the justice system back then, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, so we could have had made more progress along the way. I think we've just learned so much in the last 10 to 15 years. That's probably the only thing I would change. Is I wish I would have had more understanding and knowledge of some of the underlying causes and contributing factors. But otherwise, I think it's I think it was the right decision for me.
It sounds very fulfilling. And, you started the conversation with giving us a very vivid example of someone who was wrongfully, incarcerated in prison and had to come out and face all of these challenges. And I think that speaks to this part of learning, as you mentioned, is that most of us don't really know what the issues are that are going on in the criminal justice system because we're so detached from it. In my experience, being a Black American, I've heard so many horror stories about people who, and also just reading the news. But I think for me, and also being a lawyer myself, I'm keenly aware to the injustices and inequalities and all of the challenges, not all, some of the challenges in the criminal justice system. But can you tell our listeners a little bit more about some of the common problems that you have seen and the common problems that the Innocence Center is looking to solve?
Sure. So there's a thing called the exoneration registry, and it documents every exoneration that has happened in the United States going back to 1989. So it's this great wealth of information that kind of breaks down each and every one of these cases, and so it gives us a great opportunity to look back and figure out what are the contributing causes. What do we see are the problems that lead to wrongful convictions? And what we find in the 3,580 wrongful convictions going back to 89, what we find is that the leading contributing factor is government misconduct. What that means is that's defined as prosecutors or police or some government agent had done something that caused the wrongful conviction. In a lot of cases, it's what we call Brady evidence being withheld. So it's evidence favorable to the defense that should be disclosed by the prosecution to the defense, but it is not. And that's one. So, in those types of cases, you might see where police or prosecutors might hide evidence of innocence, or maybe some impeachment evidence on a star witness that the prosecution might be presenting that, had it been known, it might have changed the outcome to the trial. So government misconduct is a big one. Ineffective assistance of counsel, which means simply you had a bad defense attorney, and we make it incredibly hard to win on what's called IAC. You can have an attorney that sleeps through a trial, and that's not sufficient to get the conviction reversed just because your lawyer was sleeping through parts of the trial. False confession. So in about 16% of the cases in the exoneration registry, a person falsely confessed to a crime they didn't commit. That, I think, is the hardest one for the public to swallow. It's like, you think to yourself, I would never do that. I would never admit to a crime I didn't commit. But you're not a young kid sitting in a windowless room with a couple of cops who, mentally force it out of you. And so that's a big factor. Eyewitness misidentifications happen at about a fifth of the cases. So eyewitnesses are, we don't have perfect memory, and yet it's very powerful when a witness gets up at a trial and sits in the witness stand and points to the defendant, and says, that's the individual that committed the crime. It's powerful evidence. It's just not always accurate. And so we've gone back, and thankfully in many DNA cases, we've had the opportunity to go back and prove that eyewitness misidentifications are flawed. And that has led to the undoing in non-DNA cases. So where there's cases where we don't have DNA, we can still point to eyewitness misidentifications and say, look, it's a problem over here where we know for certain where we have DNA evidence. It's still a problem here where we don't have the ability to do testing. There's junk science, cases like shaken baby syndrome, even arson. Fire science has really come a long way since the late 80s and early 90s, where people were convicted on an arson theory, and it was just the science was outdated and behind. And then being Black is, in the United States, one of the leading causes of wrongful convictions. So Black Americans are 7 times more likely than white Americans to be falsely convicted of serious crimes. They're 7.5 times more likely in murder cases, 8 times more likely in sexual assault cases, 19 times more likely in drug cases. It's a contributing factor to a wrongful conviction in the United States.
I was going to ask you that. I was going to ask you whether race became, was really any sort of contributing factor, particularly with government misconduct. But what is so shocking to me is the ineffective counsel, how difficult it is to prove that your counsel was ineffective or just negligent or just, not holding up to the standard of the profession. That's amazing that someone could literally be sleeping or, just do something really egregious and they still would not be considered ineffective counsel.
Yeah, I mean, so the U.S. Supreme Court has found that not only do you have to prove that your attorney was bad, that they were sleeping or they did a poor job, but that it would have made a difference And it's that second part that prevents us from winning in so many cases. And Justice Brennan, dissenting in the case that ultimately matters for IAC, had a lot to say about that. He said, he essentially says, like, seemingly impregnable cases can sometimes be dismantled by good defense counsel. That's what he says. And he's not wrong, right? Like, you have the best lawyer, that lawyer might go and completely dismantle the prosecution case. If you have a lawyer that's sleeping on the job, you stand no chance at dismantling that case. And you won't know what it would be like to have that good lawyer if you make that requirement that it has to make a difference. Like, you can't know. You don't know what you don't know, right? So I think adding that aspect certainly makes it all the more challenging. Like, it should be enough that you've proven that they were ineffective. They slept, or they didn't come to court, or they didn't present, or they didn't request, they didn't put on witnesses they should have put on. Like, those are all things that, should be potentially something that we can use to undo a conviction. And it's just not that way.
And these are horrible, horrible problems to have in any criminal justice system, but particularly in the US criminal justice system. And I can totally see why you have decided to pick up the torch and to make this your mission, for sure. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the tech solutions to this, because, I can think of, so many ways in which technology has evolved since, as you mentioned, some different types of junk science. Science has improved, but technology has also improved. And so, what are the ways that the Innocence Center is using technology to really try to dismantle some of these systemic challenges?
Yeah, well, so case management systems, that's a basic but easy, an easy one that that we embrace, and has really just improved our ability to manage all of our cases and see our workflow from start to finish. And so we embrace and use Clio as our case management system. It's a cloud-based system. We found out about it. I was at a conference actually in Ireland in 2015, and met with a rep there who said, "Hey, yeah, we have this cloud-based system." And at the time, we were using this other product that I had to manually install on all of these desktops for our students to use. And he said, "No, it's all in the cloud." And oh, no install? No, okay. Well, like, wow, that sounds incredible. And one other really important thing was they were offering it for free. And I was like, wow, this is incredible. We're paying like $10,000 a license for this other product. And like, here is this incredible tool that's better. That's not going to cost us a penny. And it's going to help us keep all of our case files and information organized in a fashion that helps us to move forward. And, one basic example of that is if we're keeping all of our information in the same place and we're keeping all of our contacts in there, and now we're seeing, we're inputting all of the police officers that are involved in a case. In our cases, in particular in Los Angeles, you have a lot of repeat offenders. And by that, I mean, like, you have a bad cop that shows up in one case, that bad cop is going to show up in other cases. And now we have a system that allows us to see that pretty clearly and pretty easily. Now, it's just our own in-house system. So, like, I'm not capturing everything that the public defender's office in LA has already known about a particular officer, but at least internally, I can now see it. And we actually had this situation in a case probably about a decade ago. We're sitting in a classroom, and a student did a presentation on a case, and it had a jailhouse informant, this woman that had testified in a case, and it was a 1986 case. And we thought, oh, it sounds suspicious, right? The very next class, 2 days later, a different student had a presentation from like a 93 case, 7 years later, same jailhouse informant. At the time, we didn't have a case management system we were employing that would be able to track that there was this overlap. And if it weren't for the fact that those presentations happened 2 days apart, we would never have known. Like, how many instances of that have we been missing out on because of the lack of technology? So having a case management system like Clio has been incredible, but it's even more than that. So we've just more recently started using Lawmatics, which allows us to automate a lot of our intake process. I now have our application available for our incarcerated individuals to get off the library computers. They can't submit it quite yet from the computers, but I think we're moving towards that. We'd like to have it set up where it automatically then goes and grabs court documents from some of the online filing systems, though we're not quite there yet. But like you can see where like this entire thing is now starting to evolve. Going back to the very beginning, like at the start when I started doing this, you couldn't even find out the location of an incarcerated individual online. You had to call a number in Sacramento. This is for the California Department of Corrections. You had to call a number in Sacramento and sit on hold for half hour, or maybe sometimes up to an hour. When they picked up, you would have about 2 minutes to give them up to 3 people you were trying to locate. And you'd have to have either their date of birth or their prison number to find out what prison they were in. This is all just to trade snail mail. So like I'd have to call to make sure that the mail was going to go to the right place. Otherwise, it would just kick back, and we'd be in this constant search to see where they are. And people get moved regularly, if not every year. They're getting moved quite a bit through the 33 California prisons. So like the inefficiency of that system. And so that all changed in like 2012. They went online, and so we've seen slowly that like this embracing of technology has had a massive impact on us, but it's still going and it's still getting better. So like, there's just so much more we can do, like improving communication, so we're not still relying on snail mail. So we can have confidential legal communications with incarcerated individuals while they're on their iPad in their cell. Still something not available, but something I think hopefully is on the horizon. Digitizing their case files, right? Right now, they're either carrying it around in a big plastic bin, or some people are even still have all of their legal paperwork in a trash bag, as opposed to like giving them access to a scanner and allowing them to have their case files digitized. I think it would be a great thing for them safety wise, so that other people that are incarcerated in their same cell or in their same cell block don't have access to their paperwork and can find out what's going on in their case and then become a jailhouse informant or do harm in other ways. But also make it so that they've got access to justice. They can now give us access to their case file without having to mail a box they've been dragging from prison to prison for 20 years. They've got a digital version. They can just send us over Clio or whatever, tool we end up figuring out a way to employ there. So I think we've come a long way. There's still a long way to go, but technology is certainly revolutionizing our ability to, access our clients and move quicker to getting an exoneration.
And the things that you're talking about right now are basic ways of communicating with incarcerated persons, ways to effectively manage the case. These seem to me like things that should be a given, but yet these were, not in place. I mean, I think particularly for the communication between an incarcerated person and their counsel, right? And so to have those confidential communications, what was happening before? How would you even be able to contact someone if this didn't exist?
Yeah, I mean, it was all done, and it all still is done by what's called legal mail. So you send a piece of snail mail to an individual, you stamp legal mail on the outside of it, and that signals to the guards that they're not supposed to read it. They still open it and make sure that you're not mailing in contraband, but they're not supposed to be reading it. And then it goes to the prospective client or the client, and that's my communication to them. The only alternative to that for the longest time was doing a visit, a prison visit. And as you can imagine, the prisons aren't in the nicest places, and they're scattered all over the state of California. So they're not easy to get to. So some of the, I think the furthest one from us is like a 12 or 14 hour drive. We could fly to San Francisco and drive for 5 hours or 6 hours and go up to the very northernmost part of California. They're very hard to get to, and that makes it that much harder to access our clients. So snail mail is still very much a part of our communication. In fact, it's a daily part of the communication. And I'm pushing very hard to try to make that become obsolete, like it is in so many other things. Like, we've done such a great job moving to online bill pay. Well, let's move to having online confidential communications with our clients now that they all have iPads. The fact that it was an afterthought, that that entertainment was first, I get it. The people providing the iPads have to make money, and sure, they're making money off of incarcerated individuals, but it should have been at the same time that we added in the function and the capability to have communication with their lawyers. And it's not just us, right? Because people that are incarcerated need lawyers for a multitude of things, whether it's family law issues or civil rights issues within the prison. All sorts of legal issues are arising within the prison, and I think it would be significant. It would be a reduction of in work for the prison as well. They have a litigation coordinator that has to try to coordinate all of these legal issues. One way to make it a lot easier is to give them direct access to their lawyer through confidential communication.
It baffles my mind that in 2024, the United States of America is still using snail mail in some of its, correctional facilities. It's just baffling, and that's something that you wouldn't expect when we think about the U.S. justice system, and particularly as Americans, and I'm overseas but still American. You think about the country and you think about all of the rights, and we talk about these constitutional rights, and we have ideas about them as lawyers, and we memorize them and we believe in them, and then you get down to the crux of the issue where the rubber meets the road, and you find out what's happening, and you cannot resolve the reality of what's happening with what you've learned and what you've been taught. And I think that's just mind blowing to me as I hear you talk about it. It sounds like almost as though the system is, it's just not almost, the system is not facilitating the justice that these individuals require.
Yeah, and there's a whole side of things that I've learned in doing this innocence work that have to do with just like incarceration and how it functions and how it doesn't function. Forever we were spending a couple of $1,000s a year on collect calls so that our prospective clients could reach out to us and have a recorded collect call with us. And finally, the government realized that charging families to stay connected with their loved ones was actually making recidivism higher and worse, right? You're making it more expensive and cost prohibitive to stay connected to your loved ones. So what happens when that person comes home? They're disconnected from their friends and family who they couldn't afford to stay in contact with. Now they go and reoffend and they're right back into the system. So, these things, it's not just that, we're learning stuff and embracing technology and trying to make things better for innocent people, but and trying to improve our system so that our criminal legal system is better on a whole. But, obviously my goal is try to correct wrongful convictions and prevent future injustices from happening. And it's just interesting to kind of be on this, be there. We're sort of learning so much about incarceration and rehabilitation and what that actually means and how best to do it. So, communication between incarcerated people and their loved ones is so key. And I am thrilled that the iPads provide that connection. It's just we should also employ them to make sure that there's confidential legal communication with legal counsel.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, even from the spirit of, we need to do this because it makes good business sense. We don't want people to reoffend. I think there's another argument, which is this is the right thing to do. These are humans. These are people with families,
Sure.
with children, with, parents that are aging, and, they need to stay in contact because that's the right thing to do. I think of other countries and, Scandinavian countries where, rehabilitation is looked at in a totally different way from the moment that you're incarcerated. The focal point is how to get you back on track rather than a penal system where, essentially it's about a punitive piece. And so Just very interesting stuff that you're involved in, Mike. And I think, the use of technology, certainly, some people may say technology, including AI, we're having a lot of rapid development in it. Hopefully it will solve a lot of the problems. But I don't know. I think kind of a bit of devil's advocate here. Do you think it won't solve all of the problems though, right? You'll still have government misconduct. You'll still have bad actors in the system that you're really combating against.
Yeah, no, I think we've embraced AI to the extent we can at this point, and I do think it's going to have a massive impact on our work. When we have boxes and boxes of case files coming in, and we need to try to figure out with limited resources, is this a case where a person might be innocent? AI is a fantastic tool for that. It's great at summarizing massive amounts of data and telling us what's going on and to identify specific things. We've been working with a group at UCLA to try to see if there might be a way to create a predictive model so that it knows an AI, an LLM can be trained on the causes of wrongful conviction and identify them and comb through case files and say, this is a case you should take a hard look at because of X, Y, and Z, like an eyewitness identification. Maybe this is a single eyewitness identification case. Hey, we pointed that out to you, and there's a lot of inconsistencies between the police reports and their testimony. Like, that's something perfect for AI, but it's not going to solve all our problems, certainly. And I think there's quite a few things that I think we still need to figure out. There's issues with AI being able to read handwriting, and a lot of our police reports are handwritten. So, and that's not going to change for us, because our cases are often 20, 30 years old. So the handwriting was done decades ago, but I still need to go through it and analyze it and see how that impacts the case and what it means. But, I do think it could have a substantial impact on our ability to just kind of comb through cases. I think also too, it could help us to further identify where we have repeat offenders across various different cases. Like, when I get a case, I'm not inputting everybody into Clio immediately, because it's not a case that I'm necessarily ready to work on. But if I could train an AI model to automatically comb through our document management system and then also be looking at Clio to see who our problem, our regular repeat offenders are, and it can pick up on our internal data, but also have like the common causes. Like, the future is bright there, and I could see that really starting to help us just identify and sort of bring forth some of those low hanging fruit type cases.
Sure, for sure. And I could see Web3 and blockchain also being a technology that would be really useful, to the extent that it's transparent and it's sort of a ledger. I don't know to what extent that the case materials are shared between the states on a very granular level. But if there was some sort of federal blockchain system that could, of course, there are privacy issues, but ceteris paribus, everything else being equal, that's something that I could see as well as really, really helping. And so I'm optimistic with that. I think for me, listening to you speak, it has been a journey from, starting out and really having to understand what the criminal justice system is today and what the challenges are. And that's really tough to hear. It's tough to hear as a lawyer who works in the tech space. And, these corporate lawyers like myself, we're not really so much, in the litigation space, and particularly in the criminal defense side or criminal justice side. And when you think about exoneration, you think about the innocent center, and you think about the fact that these people are in a situation that they should not be in. I think it is sort of it's an emotional journey to hear about these issues, and then just really be optimistic about what technology can do for them.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. And I think, even on the most basic level, when our clients come home, often if they've been in for 20 or 30 years, like, just that idea of introducing technology to them is a challenge, right? Like, that's like you hand them a cell phone and they've not seen like the latest. They probably haven't seen any iPhones if they've been in for 20 years. They haven't seen one unless they've seen a guard with one or whatever. And so just getting up to speed on that is often a real challenge. So technology is great for us, and it's certainly improving what we're able to do, but it's also kind of a setback when our clients come home. And part of that's because they're not allowed to access technology. They are starting to allow them to access the iPads, but there certainly could be a lot more education around the use of technology so they don't come out and they're a couple of steps behind trying to reacclimate to this fast-paced and fast-moving world.
That's really fascinating. And in terms of lawyers that are listening to this and they listen to, the type of work that you're doing, what would you say to someone that's listening to this and they feel like, you know what, that sounds like an area where I could support or I could help out or I could somehow be of service? How would they go about learning about how to get involved in innocence work?
So there are 68 innocence organizations in the United States and around the world. So I would highly encourage them to find their local innocence organization. If they don't know of one around them, they can go to innocencenetwork.org and take a look. There's a pretty handy map on there that'll show you all of the various different innocence organizations that are part of the Innocence Network. Innocence organizations can certainly use all the help. There's no end in sight to this problem. There's been studies done, and the estimates are between 4 and 6% of people in prison are innocent. 4 to 6% doesn't sound like a big number until you realize there's 1.8 million people incarcerated in the United States. We're talking about 100,000 people. And 66, 68 small innocence organizations in the United States aren't going to be able to put a big dent into that massive number. So get involved with your local innocence organization. Reach out to me, and I'm happy to put you in touch with the one that would be closest to you. Donate and support your local innocence organization because we all need resources to hire more lawyers to do this work. Despite the fact that we're making these great strides in AI, we still need humans to check and make sure and do all the legal work. Like there's a lot of fear behind AI replacing lawyers, and I think it's somewhat unfounded. I think very much the lawyers still needed to do the work. The AI is a tool to help us do our jobs more efficiently and more effectively. But I would largely encourage everyone to get involved with their local organization, and by all means, please reach out to me if you're interested in helping us.
Absolutely. And are you on any social media, Mike? Are you on Twitter? Is there a Twitter handle or a LinkedIn where people can find you?
You can find me at m.Semanchik, and I'm on Instagram and Twitter, and I'm Michael Semanchik on LinkedIn. You'll find me on there as well. And our website for everyone listening in is theinnocencecenter.org.
Mike Samanchik, thank you so much for your time today, but even more so, thank you for the amazing work that you're involved in. And I personally will be keeping my ears out on the blockchain side to see what developments there are with legal tech that could support this project. I think the initiative is something that is super needed, and it's just very moving to listen to you talk about the work that you do. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.